Hello, everyone.
Good morning, everyone, or good evening, or good night, depending on where you are in the world. We're going to wait for more people to join, but as always, I want to congratulate you on finishing the first 2 weeks, and today will be the finish of the third week of Unit Masters. Exciting journey. I'd love to even hear in the chat how everybody's doing today. Yeah, I love seeing all the diversity from around the world. Looks like we might have every continent covered today. So I would love to invite you also, if possible, to turn on your cameras, just so that our speaker today doing the demo can see some of the people that are actually here and that he'll be speaking to. And I'd like to invite Alex, whenever you're ready, to turn on your camera and join us. So there's a couple things I'd love to talk about today.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome, Alex. How are you today?
I'm well. Nice to see you, Zach.
Likewise, always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. So I'm going to give a short intro, Alex, and then I'll let you kind of take it away.
Sure.
But I just want to say it's really exciting to me that you all are studying mechanisms of incentive alignment and within the blockchain economy, right? You know, understanding how decisions are made, the fact that they're immutable, what trustless actually means, who's being rewarded and for what different jobs within the ecosystem. And I'm looking forward to hearing more from Alex about DAOs in particular. But I'd like to introduce Alex first. To begin, Alex is a co-founder, a core team member here at Unit Network. He is co-founder and CEO of ESG DAO. So he has quite a experience with DAOs, which is a DAO that uses Web3 to connect people and brands and values and help businesses make positive impacts in the world. Alex was previously with the International Olympic Committee and the World Economic Forum, where he created, curated, and led innovative communities that have changed the world for the better, including the Forum for Young Global Leaders, Global Shapers, and Tech Pioneers. Alex is currently the Partnership and Grants Management for Unit Masters and a marketing manager of Blockchain Netherlands Foundation. He holds a bachelor's in international business management and is currently pursuing a master's in blockchain and digital currency. Alex fell in love with cryptocurrency because he values individualism, freedom, and financial inclusivity, and he hopes to build a better financial world. In his free time, Alex enjoys dinner with friends, reading philosophy, literature, and learning new things. So welcome, Alex. Please, I know this industry changes so fast. So if there's other things that you've added or that you're working on now, we would love to hear about it. And anything that you might want to personally share with the group today.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Zachary. Well, no, I don't, for the moment, let's say, involved in anything else other than the stuff that you have already mentioned. So I'm going to start, as Zachary said, to talk about DAOs. Let me share my screen. What we're going to tell me.
I want to just ask one question before we get started. would you prefer, as people are writing comments in the chat, would you prefer to finish your presentation and then take answer questions, or kind of answer some as you go?
So how I think the best way would be was I prepared a really short presentation to give an introduction of what a DAO is. After the presentation, there can be questions, and after the questions, we're going to go and see how you practically vote on a DAO. And after that, we're also going to have any questions, and then the session would be over. Is that, let's say, a good order of how to do things?
That sounds great. So I just want to encourage everyone that as Alex is talking, please feel free to just type your questions right into the chat, and we will come back to them afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Zach. Let me share my screen, everyone. Do you see it?
Yes.
Okay, great. You probably see yourselves as well, but let's start with the decentralized autonomous organizations, right? First of all, what are they, right? So we've already talked about unstoppable money and about how decentralized, money kind of works, I think before as well, like in terms of that, for instance, you have, you cannot, let's say, censor or stop the code that is, let's say, backed by Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency. So what DAO is, in order to understand what a DAO is, we have to kind of examine, let's say, the acronym, because it's putting unstoppable code and money together. So a DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization, and this means that decentralized means that they do not have a physical address, and also they may not be directly subject to rules or procedures regarding, corporations, for instance, because as a decentralized autonomous organization, you're an organization, right? But instead of that, they are entirely, let's say, incorporated online. So think of it a little bit, let's say, as a digital organization that lives only digitally, right? And they live on the blockchain itself instead of, let's say, Amazon, right? Amazon is in some ways, let's say, a digital organization as well, but they also have physical addresses. They have everything. Let's say they have like a physical counterpart in it as well, right? So maybe that's a good way of contrasting that DAO is just completely digital organization, while let's say Amazon is digital in some ways. Of course, it's still an internet organization, but they have a physical counterpart as well. Then autonomous, this means that they are, completely self-executed or automated through smart contracts. And thus they operate in a principle that the code is low within the limitations, let's say, of layer 1 infrastructure that they are deployed upon, right? So in that, what does this mean? This means that, let's say, you create a DAO, you create a number of smart contracts, and you code how the DAO will behave, right? So depending on how the DAO, let's say, behaves, it's encoded. So once you put it on the blockchain, it cannot be changed. And in such a way, you cannot basically change the code. Let's say you put it on the blockchain, and then one country says something, let's say, within the regulation that DAOs should be like this, let's say, right? But in this case, it would not be possible to have one DAO to change its code because it's unstoppable in such a way, right? An organization, meaning that it's a collection of entities, of people that come together to fulfill a goal, right? And some of these things are that they can interact also, let's say, with humans. This would mean that they could, well, we'll see later that they can hire people in terms of working for them and these kinds of things. They can also interact AI or anything that can send and receive information as well, right? Because as we said, code is information, Bitcoin is also information, any kind of cryptocurrencies, sort of like digitized information, right? And what basically also happens is that how should I say it? All they care about is receiving and sending valid information as defined, by the rules of consensus. So as I said, they're not the only, you kind of code it in the way that you code it, then you cannot change it. And the code just does what you have programmed it to do. So in that case, it just is that it's, let's say, interests are what has been already coded and cannot be changed, right? So basically, some argue as well that DAOs are not directly, let's say, comparable to traditional organizations, like I gave Amazon as an example, but they are built to optimize, let's say, for profit, or they are, let's say, producing severe externalities and operating at the expense of inclusion, sustainability, and resilience. This is, let's say, sometimes, because there are a lot of, how do you call it? Criticism, of course, that blockchain takes a lot of energy. That's one argument that you could, of course, say. But on the other hand, there are also other people that say that DAOs are, let's say, value-driven organizations that are entirely governed by individual members, instead of having, let's say, one central leader taking, how do you call it, decisions, right? Because this is done democratically. So governance models, this means that, let's say, you are governance, meaning also management, right? It presents many similarities with traditional corporate governance as well. For instance, this can be done with tokens, right? So you kind of buy tokens, we'll see later on as well. You buy the DAO creates a token, let's say. Let's say we have this Zoom call kind of is a DAO sort of in a way. So we create a token, and the people that are here, they get a number of tokens. And then what we can do is basically, if we would like to change something within this call, what we could do is create a proposal, and all the people in this call would be able to vote on the proposal, whether they would like something to happen or not, right? So this depends, and how it basically comes to pass, it depends, of course, on the DAO. Maybe the easiest way to see it is, let's say, 50% of people would be able to vote, more than 50% of people that would be able to vote yes or no. That would mean that, the, how do you call it? The proposal would go, if it would be, let's say, 51% of people would say yes, then the proposal would be implemented. If 51% or more would say no, it would not be implemented. Then it becomes a little bit more also complicated, depending on how much tokens one person, of course, owns. Sometimes you can do it in such a way that each person has one token, and no matter how many tokens they do, they have equal votes. So it depends, of course, on how you would like to structure any DAO. Then I would like to kind of show a little bit here as well, like what the difference between a DAO and a traditional organization is that, or in terms of organization, a DAO is flat and fully democratized. This means that there is no hierarchy as in traditional organization, like CEO, upper management, and so forth. The decision-making is more like necessary, voting is necessary. Let's say you have everyone who has a token votes, or at least the people that are interested vote for certain changes to take place. While in a traditional organization, as I said, it is the CEO. It can be, well, let's take again the example of the Zoom call, right? In this case, because I suppose presenting, or Zachary, it could be something like, okay, let me change and kick Alexandros because he's too loud, right? So that could be one way of him deciding on his own whether or not I should be kicked out of the call. In a DAO, that would be, let's say, in a traditional organization. In a DAO, instead of Zachary deciding on his own to kick me out, everyone would have, let's say, a token or a number of tokens. He would make a proposal that would say, hey guys, I think we should kick out Alexandros because he's too noisy. He would put this proposal and everyone would vote. And then depending on the outcome of the vote, I would either be kicked out or not. So, there's a difference. So in a traditional organization, it's a number of small individuals or one individual that takes decisions, while in a DAO, it's all the people that hold a token, let's say, in our members of the DAO. Now, the thing with traditional organizations as well is that they are closed. So you kind of have to ask permission to enter them. Let's say you have to apply for a job and get a, let's say, how do you call it? A job there, and then you kind of become part of the organization. In a DAO, everyone can become part of the organization as long as they buy the token. Well, that's another thing, that it is completely open, while, as I said, in a traditional organization, it's entirely closed, and you need to ask permission to enter, which is something like, as I said, a job interview where they decide whether or not you are good enough or a good cultural fit to enter the organization. Now, everything that is happening within a DAO, it is public, and everyone can view the transactions, the voting, right? You can go on the website of the DAO and see what the DAO is doing. While in a traditional organization, everything is closed. No one knows what is happening within the organization, unless the organization, the traditional organization itself, decides to say something like, hey, we decide, let's say Amazon says something like, we decided to buy Facebook. So, and they buy it, let's say, right? So we know that they decided to buy Facebook just because they let us know, but we didn't know before that they had done this decision. Within a DAO, you can see this proposal online. Let's say if Amazon was a DAO, they would have something like, should we buy Facebook? Yes or no? We will see that a little bit later, of course, as well. But it's like a little bit of theory for you to kind of understand a little bit. In terms of governance, there are different ways that it can be. Let's say with Uniswap, this is one DAO. For instance, one of the things that you need with Uniswap is that it is required that people own at least 1% of the total issued governance of Uniswap, right? So in this case, what happens is Uniswap, let's say you have 100 Uniswap tokens, right? In order for someone to kind of vote, they have to get 1% of the vote, 1% of the tokens in circulation. That would mean that someone has to buy one token in order to vote, right? So if it would be, let's say, something like 1,000, then it would be 10 tokens that they would have to buy in order to vote. So you see, it depends also on the DAO. It's not like every single DAO has the same rules. For instance, with Aave, the governance token provides, its holders with proposal and voting power. This means that you do not necessarily need to have 1% of Aave. You can just buy one token, or perhaps half a token, or 0.01%, 0.01 part of a token in order to vote, right? You also have Compound, which kind of it enforces a minimum 1% stake in order to submit a proposal. This means that people have to use staking, let's say 1% staking in order to vote. But we will see that afterwards as well. There are other ways that organizations, DAOs, are governed as well. For instance, a MakerDAO, which is one of the oldest DAOs, if not the oldest one. Participants there, have to kind of lock up their maker. Well, maker is basically the token, by transferring them from their private wallets to the voting contract, from where they can be withdrawn at any time, right? So they kind of create a wallet that is just within the DAO itself, and then through that wallet, people can vote, right? Then you have Curve. The Curve DAO also uses, voting methods to upgrade the protocol in certain ways. And in order for someone to vote, there is no minimum, but a user must have 2,500 CRV to create a proposal. This is basically, how do you call it? They have to kind of take the curve, let's say they take their token, they stake it, let's say, they lock it up, and in exchange they get these tokens which they can use afterwards in order to vote. I can also go with talk about a little bit about synthetics, which is basically, you know, in order for someone to vote, it doesn't have a governance token, but it basically needs an approval that comes from what they call a Spartan Council, which consists of 8 annually elected individuals within the DAO that review proposals and interview other authors and implement approved proposals generally within the DAO as well. Finally, we have 2 more. I don't want to bore you too much. Let's say Rarible. Rarible is basically an NFT platform, and what they do is they have the Rari token, which allows people to submit with which people can vote or submit proposals, right? Finally, you also have Yearn Finance, which basically it's a multi-DAO structure that has DAOs and sub-DAOs, basically, which is a little bit similar, let's say, to Unit, of course, as well. And it consists of Wi-Fi holders, which is basically their token, and then that collectively use this token in order to govern the protocol and the organization as a whole. And besides, as I said, you know, the governance, other things people can do with DAOs is that they can work for a DAO, right? Like you do not have, let's say, a CEO or a manager in the traditional sense. What you do is you apply and they kind of vote, well, it depends, of course, on the organization, but think of it something like you apply, you send your CV or something like this. And then the DAO itself votes after a few, perhaps, interviews that you do with, let's say, a representative of the DAO. And if you get the job, let's say, you will also see it most of the times also within the proposal. Let's say if I'm going to apply for Uniswap, as I said, you may see a proposal where they say, like, should we hire Alexandros? And they kind of say yes and no. And then if they say 51% of them say yes, of the token holders, then I may get the job, right? You can work full-time, part-time. You can also get grants for projects. If you're, let's say, building your own project, you can get grants from these DAOs. And also you can get bounties for uncovering vulnerabilities. Bounties are a little bit like, think of it as work, but it's more like instead of having 8 hours or 4 hours a week or a day, you just have one task that you have to perform. So you perform that one task, and once this task is created, you are being paid. That doesn't mean only, let's say, uncovering vulnerabilities in the code, but it can be something like translate the website of the DAO in Portuguese, right? And if someone can do that, they get paid after they have submitted it. So more or less, that is the presentation. So now do you have questions or we go and vote?
Yes. First of all, Alex, thank you so much. I know there's so much to cover when talking about DAOs, and they can be, you know, as many people, there could be that many DAOs, right? Where people's values are, where their interests are, where their ethics are, and what they feel is important, right? All of that can be coded. So I want to thank you just for walking us through some of those like general kind of frameworks and understandings of what they are. There's a number of questions that I would love to jump in and just see if we can answer some of them.
Of course.
So let me look here. One of the questions was, can you put functions into the code that would allow for changes to the DAO?
That's a good question. So there is a way that you can basically do this, right? So I'm not going to go too much into technical stuff, but instead of creating one smart contract, which would be, let's say, representing the DAO, you create 3 smart contracts, right? So one smart contract is just very simple. functions that you do not need to change, right? Like it's just very, very simple one. And then what you do, you connect that smart contract with a second one, which is basically sort of like a buffer smart contract, which says copy everything the third smart contract does. And the third smart contract is sort of like the DAO. And what happens with this is that instead, so what you can do with this smart contract is, let's say if there is a hack or a vulnerability, you can recreate that smart contract without the vulnerability. You take away that smart contract and put in the third one a new one, and then the buffer smart contract. What you program the second smart contract to do is basically it kind of says do whatever the third smart contract does, and that third smart contract you cannot delete anything. You just put it aside and add a new smart contract without the vulnerability. And the buffer, let's say, smart contract says, okay, copy whatever the third one does. And through the first one, people can just click and vote, very simple functions, let's say, that you do not necessarily need to ever change. Does this answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're talking about a kind of checks and balances kind of system that would allow for some leeway to make changes, for some flexibility.
Exactly.
You know, even before we jump into some of the more specific questions, I'd like to go back one step, because when I got into Web3 and started to learn about DAOs, I had some misconceptions, and I'd like to bring them up and just chat with you about them. So I kind of thought of a decentralized autonomous organization as kind of like all or nothing. Like either it was centralized or it was decentralized. But that's not necessarily the case, right? That oftentimes there's a spectrum, even within the lifetime of a DAO, that it may start more centralized and eventually become more decentralized. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, exactly. So one of the things that you guys have to kind of also think of is that every DAO, in theory, you could say start centralized because you need the founder or the founders of the DAO, which is just a number of people that have the vision and they kind of create the DAO, right? So if I decide to create a DAO, let's say an NFT platform that is a DAO, it's just me creating it, right? Just one person. So in that case, I'm kind of, in the beginning, you could say I'm the kind of CEO because I created, so I'm the founder. Then I create the token and people can take the token and start voting. And in that case, what I do, I kind of say, okay, I don't want to be the CEO anymore for it to be centralized. So I step down, I get some tokens, right, for myself perhaps as well. And then everyone who has the tokens votes, and then it becomes more decentralized. That's one way of thinking about it, right? This can take, because, creating a DAO can be also kind of challenging. Sometimes it takes time. So sometimes certain stuff can be not decentralized. And I'll give you another example, right? There are certain tokens called fund tokens, right? And these are football tokens, let's say European football tokens. That would be, for you, Zach, I suppose, soccer. But kind of think of, certain football clubs like Manchester City. Then you have Juventus that have these tokens. You have Roma, I think you have Inter that has these tokens. And what they do is they're kind of decentralize the football club as well, because whoever has these tokens, the Juventus tokens, the fans, they can vote for certain changes to be done within the club. But they do not run the whole club. So let's say Juventus decides to buy back Cristiano Ronaldo, right? So what they can do is they buy the Cristiano Ronaldo, and then they say to the fans, okay, guys, we're going to give you the choice to decide which number of jersey Cristiano Ronaldo is going to wear, whether it's number 10, number 20, right? Of course, it's still mostly centralized, and then the fans do not have much say, but they do get certain, engagement with the football club that they love. And then you could still make the case that it's decentralized, but of course, in that case, it's just 0.01% of the whole organization that is decentralized. So these are two examples that come out of my mind, but I suppose if I think about
There's many more.
more will come as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm just trying to find ways, that everyone could in some ways think about it. Even if it is, let's say, not football, let's say if you do not like soccer or football, think of it as a basketball as well, right? Because you can apply it to a basketball team. Someone buys a basketball player and they ask their fans something like how do you call it? What kind of jersey should this basketball player wear?
Yeah.
So you can just change the sports a bit and you will have the same effect, let's say.
Amazing. Yeah, I know there's other examples we could think about, like filmmaking and having people actually vote on the actors or vote on the storyline or vote on which platform they would like to release it on. So it's really just looking at like communal decision making, right? Where all of the stakeholders are present at the table, which in a lot of traditional companies, the users, the employees are not at that decision making table. So it's one of the things that excites me the most is that we're really looking at a paradigm shift in terms of the power structures, right? And like Alex said earlier, in most DAOs, there's not a hierarchical structure. So it's much more horizontal. Alex, there's a couple more questions and then I'll come back to Dorina, but
Sure.
Somebody was asking, does a DAO have to be registered like a trust or an LLC?
So it depends on your jurisdiction, I suppose, as well, right? For the moment, as far as I know, let's say in my part of the world, which is the EU, they haven't still regulated DAOs in some ways. So how DAOs are seen in a regulation way is that it's not an organization, a legal organization, but it's more like a partnership or a general partnership, right? Other times you see, for instance, Wyoming, which is, let's say, a United States state. I think I haven't gone too deep into their legal structure, but I think like in Wyoming is one of the very few places in the world where you can actually register the DAO, and no matter where its organizations are, where its members are, they are still, let's say, part of the organization. What is quite interesting to think about it, because let's say the United States doesn't have the very best relationship, let's say, with Russia right now, right? So what happens with a DAO is that you do not know who is buying the token. So in that case, you can have a United States organization, which is, let's say, the DAO, but you can have people from Russia buying the token and they vote. So you can make different, arguments about it, but I like to see it more like that it's makes normal everyday people being able to kind of circumvent all this political thing that they do not have any kind of power over, let's say, right? Because not all, well, you have 150 million Russians, and if you think of it individually, not everyone is for the war, but everyone is getting punished for the war with the sanctions. And in this case, you kind of see, you can have a way for everyone to participate, let's say.
Excellent. I see Dorina above had asked, would you say that needing to buy a token may be a financial barrier to join a DAO?
Oh, that's a good question, actually. Yes and no, right? Because it depends. It depends, because in one way, you can buy, depends on the DAO, right? For instance, we saw at Uniswap before, you kind of need to have at least 1% of the tokens in circulation in order to vote. And basically that would mean that, yes, for people that do not have the money to buy that 1%, that would be a barrier to entry. But there are other DAOs that are completely open. You can buy 0.001% of a token and vote. Of course, then your vote would not perhaps count as much. So it depends on the structure, because there are also DAOs that use NFTs. And in that case, you can get perhaps the NFT either for free or just buy one NFT that is not, how do you call it, very expensive, and you can get it, right? Or you can create your own DAO that is entirely free for people to join. And so it depends, right? It depends on the DAO. So yes and no. It depends on the economical, let's say, possibilities of the individual that wants to join the DAO, and how it is being structured, let's say. Does that
Yeah.
answer the question?
Yeah, I'd love to add to that. And I think, Doris, that's an excellent, Dorina, that's an excellent question. And I think, again, as with everything, when we think about technology, it really comes down to the people who are using it, right? So it's possible to create an incredibly elite DAO that might have a very expensive NFT to be able to have access to that group. And we know, some of those exist right now. And there may be other ones that will give away governance tokens, that just by joining, you have the right. And in that manner, I think it's really, finding DAOs that align with your values, right? So for example, I saw someone below writing about Climax DAO. Let me find that one. Elias was saying, Climax DAO deals with the reduction of carbon emission in our world. How can one integrate the same idea into forest reserves for wildlife preservation in a DAO, like a project for the world?
Wait, is it a question?
It is a question, right? And I think.
Could you repeat the question? Because of course, you would still need perhaps some, how do you call it? Some thought, but could you, Zach, please repeat the question?
Yeah. So Elias is asking, how can one integrate the same idea of Climax DAO kind of reducing carbon emissions into the idea of like a forest reserve for wildlife preservation?
So one thing that I've seen is, it's in Switzerland, I think, right? So there is something called tokenization, right? So this means that you kind of have an asset or a physical, let's say, item or anything basically, and you create a digital twin of it, whether it's in cryptocurrencies or as an NFT. And somewhere in Switzerland, I don't remember exactly which city does it. What they're trying to do is tokenize their trees, right? So what you can do is basically someone can buy one tree which is owned by them, and no one can kind of cut down that tree, right? So you can create, let's say, NFTs out of, I don't know, all the Amazon, all the trees in the Amazon forest, perhaps, right? It's just a way of thinking of it, and it kind of becomes private property in some ways. And then you would not be able someone to come and cut that tree because you own it. Then you would have to either sell them the NFT and they could be able to cut it because they own it, or they would have to pay you in order for that to happen.
Yeah. And
you can create, I suppose, that's actually a good question. Then you can create maybe a DAO that tokenizes them, and perhaps you can create, whoever owns a certain tree within a forest could have, well, a token that represents a tree in a forest could vote. I mean, this is just me my mind, right?
Yeah.
That's something that could technically be at least possible.
Yeah, I would love to add to this, and just, we often associate DAOs with good behavior and good actions and kind of working towards sustainable goals, which is oftentimes the case with DAOs. I feel like the people who are creating DAOs really are aspiring to do good things in the world. But I think it's important to also remember that DAO is really just an organizational structure, both online and within the community. But I could create a DAO today and have people come, and that we could be deciding to cut down all the trees, right? It's really just a community owned and community kind of decision-making process, right? So in that sense, we could take a DAO governance structure and apply that to any organization in the world. And Anil was asking about this. He says, do you have an example of a DAO in the educational space? And he was also asking, how do you start a DAO, and can a new university be built as a DAO? And the answer is yes, right? And you could use, let's say there was a new university or a new school that was starting in, I'm going to say Kevin's village or town or city, wherever he lives, right? And the interesting thing here would be, and I'm guessing his incentive would be, that this university is going to be owned through tokenization by maybe the creators of the university, the founders, by the investors, by the teachers, and by the students, and maybe even by the community, right? So basically what happens is you have all of the stakeholders, all of the people that in some way are related to this new school that Kevin has created are at that table and part of that decision-making process, right? So they may decide that, you know what, we want the school to have solar panels, so then if there's a power outage, we can still have class, right? Or they may want to decide 50% of the school has to be girls. We want to make sure that there's equal equality, in education. And so I think if you think about it, it can be applied to anything. I have a friend who just started a new soccer team in California, and I've been talking to him about imagine a community-owned soccer team where the fans actually are stakeholders in the club and can help in that decision-making process. Alex, is there anything you would like to add kind of to that education or university take?
No, because actually, if it wasn't for you, I would say that technically it is possible, as you said, to create, a DAO that is a university, but you would not, I do not personally know of any real life, at least for examples for now. Maybe they still exist, right? Maybe if you go on Google and write something like education DAOs or university DAOs, university decentralized autonomous organization as a university or as a school, maybe something will come out, but I do not know any real life examples yet, let's say, right? But of course, this technology is progressing so quickly that it's really impossible to track down all the DAOs that are active. So maybe, for instance, because when you sleep, right, like when I sleep in Europe, in the US, it's still day, right? So more DAOs in theory can be created when I'm sleeping. So, and when I'm when I'm awake, more DAOs in Europe, right? So it's like a 24/7 technology that doesn't stop or doesn't sleep. So it's very difficult to track all the developments. Because I'm doing a master's, of course, as Zachary said, I'm working in the industry. I spend most of my day, let's say, within the industry, learning, studying, and I still can't keep up with everything. I'm reading also the news every day, so it's really difficult. You can't really keep up, no matter how much you try, with everything that is being developed. You can learn how the technology works so that you can understand how one DAO works and what they're trying to achieve, I suppose. But you cannot possibly track all the development, and if you're one person, let's say.
Yeah, it's a lot. I'd love to give another example. There's, I think, an art gallery DAO. I'll find the gallery DAO. It's called .art, and this is a metaverse gallery where the users actually get to decide what art is going to be exhibited, right? Which again is drastically different than going to a museum in your city where there's a board of directors of probably 10 people who are kind of the gatekeepers in deciding what's going to be in the gallery, right? So I think it's also interesting to think about DAOs in terms of there may be parts of the business model that the users vote on, but there may be other parts that are not voted on, right? And that'll depend on the community. And again, it might be, I'm sure if I'm joining a DAO, there's certain things that I may be interested in and other things that I'm not really interested in, right? Like how they're going to code the metaverse, I could care less. What artwork they're going to put in there, I'm very interested in that.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to make sure that it's representative of the community, right?
Last thing before we could, I suppose, show how to kind of vote.
Yeah.
in a DAO. I would say, you know, with Zachary, one thing that is a debate now is that people should have a decentralized open metaverse as an alternative to a centralized one. And I'll give you an example. Let's say Meta or Facebook, right? Mark Zuckerberg took Facebook, renamed it to Meta, and the metaverse that Zuckerberg is working on is centralized because he will be the CEO of it, or if you will, the god of it, because he will be able to be the one that decides what happens with the metaverse, right? In a decentralized open metaverse, anyone would be able to join, and whoever has, let's say, one NFT for the metaverse, or perhaps a certain, let's say, token, would be able to vote on certain changes within the metaverse. So you can also think of metaverses as DAOs. And well, I'd rather see DAO metaverses, to be fair, than what Zuckerberg is building, because what Zuckerberg is building can become very, very dystopian as well. Anyhow, I suppose, Zach, let me also show how someone could, how do you call it, vote on a DAO. Let's share my screen. Do you see it?
Yes.
All right, great. So normally, you know, you go, let's say, on Binance or wherever, let's say, the token can be found, and of course you buy it, you put it, let's say, depends of course on the DAO, but let's say, let's go to a website that is called Snapshot. So what Snapshot basically is, snapshot.org, is basically brings all the DAOs together in a center, and depending on what kind of tokens you have, you can kind of either create a proposal for the DAO, or you can vote in. So let's take Uniswap as an example. I have to connect my MetaMask. I'm going to put my password. Yep. So you go to Uniswap, you have these active ones. I do not have actually Uniswap tokens, but we can do it in, how do you call it? In a way that you just need to click on something in order for it to take effect. So for instance, here you kind of see about, this is, if you click on it, it basically talks about a little bit about the DAO. You can click here to get more information. You have the treasury, which is basically depending on the DAO. Some DAOs have money within a treasury, and then they vote what to do with this money. This means that they can, let's say, buy, you could even say technically they could buy an organization, or they could buy certain tokens of another DAO in order to vote as well. It could be they could take some of their money in the treasury to donate to an organization, to an NGO, or something like this. For instance, one of the DAOs during, you know, the war in Ukraine, they donate a certain amount for humanitarian needs to Ukraine, right? So they kind of created a proposal here. You can create a proposal and you can say, let's donate 1,000 Uniswap tokens to Ukraine. Well, Uniswap doesn't have, as you saw, a treasury, but this is, let's say, let's think that they do have a treasury, right? And then you kind of say something like, of course, the description, something like, because a lot of people are suffering, the money would, the money would help alleviate suffering and buy food and medication for civilians, something like this, right? Then you can attach an image or something that you would like to do. You can also add link where people can talk about it. Let's say, instead of just voting on it, they can comment and say something like whether they agree or not and why it is so, let's say. Then you can go on preview and you can see how it would look like. Well, this is, of course, just a very basic one. You normally have proposals that are very, very detailed. We'll go to some of those proposals afterwards and you will see. Then you go to continue. If if I would have tokens on this DAO, and then you would basically be able to publish it. And once it would be published, it would be here in the proposals, right? You see here, there are closed proposals and there are active proposals or open proposals. Closed ones are, of course, the ones that have already been voted on and have been, how do you call it? Closed already because the decision has been taken and most of the times it has already been also implemented. So let's see with this open one, right? So you kind of see here that which pools should be selected. This is for basically a liquidity pool selection between Optimism. This is another blockchain with Uniswap. And they kind of decide which pair of the tokens should be put in the pool. And then you can vote here. You can see who already voted and how much Uniswap they hold or whatever token they hold. In other DAOs, it's another, of course, token. And then you can click and vote, let's say. In this case, I have, as I said, 0 uni. So in that case, you can also say something like, because I love this pair. And normally you go and click on confirm, right? And then you vote, and depending on how long the vote takes, here you see start date, October 14, which was 2 hours ago, until October 17 at 4 p.m. Central European time, I suppose, because I'm in Central European time. And in that case, once this ends, depending on which one will win, I think this one will win. It's still early to say, but it's 97%, right? And then once the whole thing closes, no one can anymore vote. And in other DAOs, it's very similar to this. But as I said, it depends on how the DAO has decided to create, let's say, the token and what kind of governance mechanism they decided to do. Because as you saw before also in the presentation, each DAO requires certain, let's say, percentage of tokens in order to vote. In this case, Uniswap, as we said, asks for 1% of the tokens to be held by someone in order to vote, right? And to be fair, like to me, I'm not very much of a huge Uniswap fan. I still respect them. They were one of their very first DAOs, but I do not care that much about this DAO to buy 1% of their whole tokens, let's say, and vote, right? But this is just an example of how you can vote. And the same goes with any other DAO that you would, let's say, have here, of course, as well, right? Does anyone have any questions in terms of this?
I would love to point out, thank you so much. And I know we're coming up on time, but I would love to point out that oftentimes these new ways of seeing the world, new ways of organizing people have influence on traditional structures, right? So like you'll see this oftentimes in politics. If there's one candidate that we know is not going to win, that may be on the extreme left or right or in one area or another, even though they're not going to win, they affect the dialogue of what's being talked about during that election, right? And so I think DAOs, in a similar sense, where they're giving the ability to its members to vote, is making all of the traditional places think about how are we going to listen better to our community, right? So for example, I believe you're seeing a lot more applications where people can take polls. It's not an official vote because it's not going to make a decision, but the fact that we could hold a poll, like so say for example, even within Unit Masters, if we had a poll and said, hey, we want to have class on Friday and everybody else voted for Monday or Tuesday, then it becomes a question of, even as decision makers, me and Alex decide we're going to have it on Friday, but the community might say, these people don't listen to us. And so you're going to go and find another community. So even though sometimes you're not the one making the decision-making process, if you have an option to actually have your voice heard, you're now affecting the decisions. And, you know, and especially in a tokenized economy, you're not just leaving, but you're taking your money with you. And you're saying, I will go and be part of another DAO that actually values me, listens to me, and makes decisions, right? So I think it's really interesting. And even in Zoom, I was just looking like, how do we do a poll on Zoom? I would be willing to bet that within a year, we'll be able to vote and have polls on Zoom within these contexts, just because of what the work that DAOs are doing, and that they're going to influence a lot of even our Web 2 and Web 3 tools. Thank you, Alex. Keep going.
And yep, and really quickly, we still have 2 minutes. I just wanted to draw another attention. This is like not obviously advertising, but it just came to me as an idea because Zach said about politics. This is another DAO that I know, and I really love the idea. It's called City DAO, and what they have done is they have created 10,000 NFTs. Each NFT signifies a citizenship to a decentralized city. And here whoever buys, let's say, the NFT becomes citizen and has governance rights over a decentralized city. As you see here, people are from Turkey, people are from Nigeria, from Thailand, from China, Europe, USA, right? And how they do it is basically in a very similar way that we kind of showed before, right? You kind of have the NFT and you kind of get one vote. And then they kind of bought a plot of land in Wyoming. As we mentioned before with Zach, Wyoming allows the registration of DAOs. And people are building there, let's say, a small quote unquote city. Well, they kind of bought a really small plot of land, but what they are they call it city in terms of branding, but basically they just manage the land and they kind of lease it and these kinds of things, right? But it's a nice concept as well. Like, you can start small with just a small plot of land, and maybe you can create small communities that are DAOs within a city. Let's say you have within each city, you have small regions, right? Like in Antwerp, you have certain it's a city, but within the city, you have smaller regions. So maybe each region could become a DAO, and the city could become a DAO. The whole country could become a DAO maybe in 200-300 years, who knows? But it's a nice also like project that came to my mind once Zachary said about politics and how politicians are looking at making people participate more on the table, of course, as well. Do you guys have any questions? Perhaps one or two?
I think we're on the hour.
Exactly.
So I think it's a good time to wrap up for today. It's Friday. I wish all of you an amazing weekend. I want to thank you for taking time. We know that there's other things that you could be doing, and we appreciate that you're here with us, learning together, contributing to our community. I encourage all of you to continue these conversations within your study groups, within the Telegram chats, share information, and you're really at the forefront. In 20, 30 years, people are not going to believe that you were learning about DAOs, in 2022. And I'm excited to see what we together, people right here, are going to come up with, and how we are going to use these tools to solve some of the problems in today's world, right? So thank you again. Have an amazing weekend. And please share info. If you come up with a really cool DAO, drop it into Telegram chat. If you have ideas, if you're curious about what exists, put it in there. There's a lot of almost anything that you're thinking about, whether it's an educational DAO, a forest planting DAO, they probably already exist. So do a little bit of research. And I would even guess that they're looking for people to join them and help build those DAOs. Exactly. So incredible opportunity to find out what are your interests and values aligned with, do some research to find out what's out there, and then go and join them and say, hey, I want to be part of this. How can I contribute?
Or you can create your own DAO as well.
Also.
Yep.
Also. Wonderful.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
you, all of the other unit masters, people who have been here helping to moderate. Appreciate you all. Have a great weekend.
You too.